A storehouse of promises. The promise of clean, green crops. Seed that promises Australians a less pesticide-polluted environment. Genetically engineered crops, made first in the USA, are heading our way. They look natural, but they've been given powers they could never gain through nature. BT cotton has been genetically engineered to produce a natural insecticide that comes from the BT bacterium, Bacillus thuringiensis, so the plants can kill their own insect pests. The companies behind such crops proclaim the dawn of a green revolution.
In some ways it is cleaner than using chemicals. It's renewable. It's natural.
While Australian farmers eagerly await the first sales of BT cotton, 2 million acres have already been planted this season in the southern United States. As in Australia, the pesticides these farmers rely on are no longer killing pests so well. BT cotton promises not only few sprays, but a plan to stop BT toxin losing its sting. So, Jim, this is a BT cotton crop, but those promises appeal to Mississippi farmer Jim Whitfield.
I think we can definitely reduce our chemical dependency. We have gotten way too chemical dependent. And I know when I was a kid, you know, it was unheard of to poison cotton then like we do now. And you're talking about 30, 35 years ago. And in that time, it's just unbelievable, the changes and how much we have gotten more dependent on pesticide.
While the US is further down the genetic engineering track, it also leads the field in critics. Among the strongest, the Union of Concerned Scientists in Washington.
What we have with biotechnology, I fear, is a succession of short-term, sort of silver bullet solutions, providing false hope, I think, to many people that biotechnology is going to solve the problems of agriculture.
Although BT cotton is due for commercial release next month in Australia, there's been precious little debate about the downsides of us taking this plunge into a genetically engineered agricultural future. But we need to be fully aware of the dangers, because if not, we could find ourselves sooner rather than later right back on the chemical treadmill, with all its expense and pollution.
"45 gallons of chemical spray are pumped into a tank fitted in place of the front cockpit."
Just about everyone now thinks the fewer chemicals we use, the better. But remember, not so long ago, during what we were also told was a green revolution, chemicals were to be our saviours.
Mike was ready for the first run.
And at first, pesticide sprays had incredible success against cotton's biggest pest, the Heliothis moth. Heliothis, in their hungry caterpillar phase, can turn a crop to trash in just a few days. But in fighting Heliothis, cotton farmers have reaped a harvest of troubles. They're blamed for everything from polluting waterways to claims that drift from their pesticide sprays causes disease.
My child, until I came to Emerald, didn't have sore eyes. Now she has sore eyes every time that the spray season comes on.
People in our own streets with all sorts of, from allergies right up to different sorts of cancers.
The breathing problems, asthma.
The worst legacy for farmers is simply that many chemicals no longer work. The problem is resistance.
back when we had the pyrethroids came on the market a few years ago. They looked like they were going to last a long time, and now it looks like the worms have really built resistance to them. So how long before the worms build a resistance to these BT cottons, I don't know.
In any population, a few insects will naturally have slightly different genetic makeups that allow them to survive a pesticide dose. Over time, these stronger insects breed up to create a whole army the pesticide no longer kills. From the organochlorines to pyrethroids, Heliothus have developed resistance to one pesticide after another. Cotton might earn Australia $1 billion export dollars in a bumpy year, but only after farmers outlay up to $100 million in pesticides. And they may only be useful for a few more years. In eastern Mississippi, the fight is virtually lost. Heliothus have become resistant to every chemical they use. Last year, most crops weren't even worth harvesting.
In a situation like you had in the hills of Mississippi, you've got people backed up against the wall, and you'll go to the witch doctor in a situation like that.
It's in this climate that the US agrochemical giant Monsanto created BT cotton.
We see it as a real fundamental step change in how crops will be grown in the future, and using biotechnology to address some of the issues that we're having problems with.
BT cotton's power comes from this crystal-shaped toxin, a natural insecticide emitted by the common soil bacterium, BT. Monsanto engineered the gene that makes this toxin into cotton. So the plants now make the toxin. This BT toxin is environmentally friendly because it kills only Heliothus and closely related species. In theory, it could fit well with sustainable agriculture practices, like those that use beneficial insects to help kill pests like Heliothus. That said, you might be surprised to learn that BT cotton will not do away with spraying. BT toxin doesn't kill cotton's minor pests that the old broad-spectrum sprays used to: mites, green mirids and aphids. At the United States Department of Agriculture in Mississippi, they've worked out that farmers will have to spray BT cotton a number of times to stop these minor pests becoming major ones. And there's another complication. In Australian conditions, the level of BT toxin drops off drastically at the end of the season. So Australian farmers will still have to spray for Heliothus before harvesting. In all, scientists predict farmers will have to spray BT cotton up to 6 times a season. So how does this sit with BT cotton's green sales pitch?
Well, that's a little bit misleading. A grower cannot expect to plant BT cotton and not have to spray at all. We hope that his number of sprays will be reduced, but definitely there will still be some insects that need to be controlled.
But the biggest danger is that Heliothus will become resistant to BT toxin, just as they have to all the other chemicals. This monster strain of Heliothus can only be killed by 2,000 times the normal BT dose. The insect, bred by researchers at the University of North Carolina, developed such extraordinary resistance in just 20 generations. So Fred, we've got 3 young cotton plants here.
Yeah.
What's this first one?
Okay, this is just a typical cotton plant, does not produce any Bt toxin, and as you can see, the larvae placed on here have done considerable amount of damage to the plant.
Entomologist Professor Fred Gould created the monster strain. This one here.
Okay, now this is a Bt cotton plant.
This is where Bt cotton's power turns against it. It's because the plant makes Bt toxin nearly all the time that there's such a high risk of Heliothus soon becoming immune to its effects.
Well, this third one is also a Bt plant that produces a high titer of the toxin. But what we did on this plant is we put a strain of larvae on this plant that have developed resistance to the Bt toxin. And as you can see, there is damage to some of the leaves on this plant.
So if Heliothus does develop a resistance, we're almost back where we started.
Yep, that's about it.
20 insect generations translates to only 5 years in the field before resistant grubs develop. But that danger's been recognised, and there are big plans to ward off resistance.
The devil is in the details. It is, in fact, the details that will make it work or not.
The stakes have always been high in the battle between farmer and pests, but never quite as high as they are now for Australian farmers. That's why cotton industry researchers have joined Monsanto in planning this complicated strategy against resistance. There'll be even more defences on the Australian front than in the US, including limiting the initial plantings of the crop. At a trial crop in Narrabri, the CSIRO has decided that Australian farmers should destroy Heliothus pupae that survive at the end of the season.
The critical part of resistance management is to minimise the number of Heliothus that survive.
Because some of those might be resistant.
That's right, some of them may be.
So the only way to destroy those pupae is, after harvesting, give it a bit of a plough.
Yes, that's what we want farmers to do, is that after they harvest their Bt cotton, is to plough the fields to ensure that these pupae are destroyed.
Farmers worried about soil erosion may be reluctant to plough deeply enough to crush the pupae and their burrows. But it's the main battle plan that may prove much harder to execute. The anti-resistance strategy everyone's relying on, in Australia as well as the United States, is a refugia or refuge. Jim, this is your refuge. How big?
It consists of about 16 acres, goes from the corn on our right to the tree line down in front of us.
A refuge is a normal, non-Bt crop planted near the Bt crop. Heliothus breeding up in the refuge won't get a bite of Bt, so they won't build any resistance, an army of pure recruits on the farmer's side. The plan is that when resistant Heliothus charge out of the Bt crop, they'll meet the non-resistant Heliothus heading out of the refuge. They don't fight though, they mate. Their offspring should lose most of their resistance to Bt. But the pests may not behave according to plan. It's quite possible most refuge insects will have flown by the time resistant ones are looking for a mate. If resistant then mate with resistant, you've got a whole population Bt no longer kills.
16 acres going from the corn.
As the main scheme to stop Heliothus resistance, the refuge strategy has an awful lot of uncertainties.
Well, I think there are problems because I hear producers talk about taking their refuge and planting it in an unproductive area and just leaving it like that. And sometimes the refuges are miles away from the Bt cotton, and I question whether or not this is going to accomplish what the refugia was planned to accomplish.
I think that it's going to be very difficult to get farmers to cooperate when it is not clear to them that it is to their immediate advantage. And they must be thinking about the next loan they have to pay off, the next piece of equipment they have to buy. And they would rather, quite reasonably, plant 100% of their acreage to BT cotton rather than sacrifice, perhaps, 4, 5, 10, 15% to these refugia.
So who will make farmers comply with the refuge plan long term? Refuges will be a condition of the sales contract for BT cotton seed. But on-farm policing of refuges will be done by Monsanto itself, a concern to a number of scientists.
I think the regulatory authorities, the EPA or some of the regulatory authorities should have some involvement here. But that's really nothing to do with researchers.
Monsanto claims that, unlike the pesticides of the past, they'll restrict sales if necessary to make BT cotton last.
It is our technology. Monsanto spent about 10 to 15 years developing this kind of technology in large amounts of money. So we want to make sure that it is around for a number of years, so it's a benefit to everyone, including Monsanto.
I think they need to recoup quickly some investment. But companies have been doing this for years with pesticides. Pests develop resistance. What steps have they taken to try to prevent resistance from developing? No, they've tried to sell as much of the pesticide as they can. I think that the people who are early in the technology will profit, and then they will move on to some other short-term solution.
There are commercial pressures on Monsanto. Biotechnology company Mycogen has its own version of BT cotton waiting in the wings. And it says that if resistance develops to current strains of BT, they'll have new products all ready to roll using different BT strains.
There are thousands of strains of BT, each of which produces a unique protein. And Mycogen has a discovery program that's been going on for about 10 years now, and we have more than 30 BT toxins identified and patented.
But science suggests this scheme may also be short-sighted. It's quite possible resistance will develop to many kinds of BT in one fell swoop.
In many cases, you see resistance developing only to a very narrow spectrum of BT toxins. But in other cases, it can be broad. If that happens, then we're in trouble.
This is not how a green revolution should operate. A truly green revolution should be one that will be sustainably green, one that we can look forward to generations of being able to farm, and not just 3 or 4 years of dependence on one kind of genetically engineered crop.
We lose BT crops to resistant pests. What's next? Cotton farmers may be forced back to sprays, new, probably more expensive pesticides, perhaps more polluting. But other farmers may suffer too. A spray form of BT has been used by fruit and vegetable growers for 30 years. It's one of the few sprays organic farmers are allowed to use. But if resistant Heliothus spread from BT cotton to other crops, farmers like Cecil Brooking will find his BT spray no longer kills Heliothus in his vegetable crops either.
Well, BT is the basis of my management program for the Heliothus, and without BT, have to go back to the drawing board I would consider it a huge loss because we don't have anything else right now that's an alternative. Each time we lose a technology, it comes with a higher price technology that replaces it. Worst case scenario is being left with a battle that you've got no tools to approach.
So here's a group of farmers who did not choose to use the transgenic crops, who had no say in the genetic engineering of them, who will have lost a valuable insecticide due to the pressures of the ag biotech industry.
So what have we here, Mike?
This is an ordinary corn plant, and as you can see...
It seems the danger that we'll soon be back on the chemical treadmill is increasing.
Next to it is a plant that has been transformed with a BT gene.
The BT gene is being built into virtually every major commercial crop.
Corn is the first crop, along with cotton, but we're also working now to develop insect-resistant varieties of soybean, sunflower, sorghum, canola, wheat, alfalfa. So there are opportunities in many, many crops. The general consensus is that this will be a multi-billion-dollar industry by the year 2000, 2005, and will progress well beyond that.
That may be great for biotechnology companies, but if so many crops are out there, all producing BT, controlling resistance will be far more difficult.
We, as researchers, are very concerned about, I guess, the proliferation of the use of BT genes in many crops, often in situations where it's hard to see the use is justified. In cotton, we've got a huge problem with a major pest in what is a very, very valuable crop. But in some of the other applications of BT genes, it's very difficult to see the justification.
We will probably know in 3 years whether we're going to have access to the BT technology for a long time. And at that point, it may be too late. We may not have done enough to know where we are by the time it actually happens.
The danger is that these genetically engineered BT crops will turn out to be just a high-tech version of the short-term quick fix. It seems as long as we're looking for silver bullet solutions to our agricultural problems, nature, represented here by the Heliothus worm, will find the flaws in all our plans. But there is, of course, a way off the chemical treadmill. Back in Mississippi, Jim Whitfield, who you'll remember is trying BT cotton, is also broadening his approach with a few sustainable agriculture techniques.
The residue, that's some wheat residue there.
Such as soil-enriching compost in place of fertiliser, and cover crops to keep weeds down instead of chemicals.
And this is the cleanest start we've ever had, and we've got the least chemicals under this cotton that we've ever had. If you look down here, I'm real pleased with how you can find, because we haven't had any rain in quite a while, and if you look there, now see that is, you can almost make that almost sticks together. We have some land that we've been intensely cover cropping, composting now for about 3 or 4 years, and we've got approximately a half a bale to the acre increase the last 2 years. So over a 2-year period, we've got an extra bale of cotton. Well, a bale of cotton's worth $400.
Sustainable agriculture has got to be sustainable from an economic standpoint as well as an agronomic standpoint. And you've got to be able to make a profit, or else you got a hobby on your hands.
And a cover crop, compost, those are things that, you know, my granddaddy did them. That's not something that's 100 years ago or that's totally out of reach. Those are things we can do. We can do those things.
If in the last 40 years we had spent as much in this country on sustainable ag research as we have on chemical research, we would have a lot of the answers to a sustainable agriculture.
Since we filmed that story, there have been reports from Texas that Heliothis have begun infesting young BT cotton plants. That's not to say resistance has set in, but it raises more questions about the crop's effectiveness. And that's our program for tonight. There'll be no quantum next week except in Western Australia. Instead, the federal opposition will reply to the budget live on ABC TV. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. I hope you can join us. Good night.
Now that's another movement you've not seen from a treasurer before. Did you like that? Yes. And also we learned